Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of A Real Point of View. Joining me are my cohorts, the must-see movie gentleman himself, Mr. Larry Domkowski, and the movie maven, Miss Karen D. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Hanging in there.
Good, good. Well, today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing with a twist in film and twisting character. Today's theme basically is about changing the scope in the acting. We're going to talk about famous movie gangsters. And so I guess the best way to say it is famous movie gangsters in non-gangster roles. So the famous movie gangsters have taken on that persona time and time again of being gangsters in film or being the real tough guys in film. So when it comes to acting, is that the whole scope of acting? Shouldn't there be some variance, some diversity? So today we're going to talk about that, a little bit of that diversity, going from being a gangster to something else. So each of us has picked a particular actor, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then get into a role that they've done that is quite the opposite, quite different than their previous roles. So let's go first.
Why don't you go first today?
Rock and roll. Okay, so one of the
Bet you didn't see that coming.
No, I didn't. Hey, it's cool. I appreciate it. So today I'm going to talk about a movie that actually came out in 1941. So this particular actor is one of my favorite actors. The first time I saw him do something different than being a gangster kind of threw me for a loop. And that movie actually was Yankee Doodle Dandy, where I found out that my particular actor was a dancer. I had no idea. But the movie I want to talk about this time puts him in a totally different light. And the actor is James Cagney. Now, James Cagney is known for that famous top of the world, man, top of the world, before he got knocked off the top of the world. Because he was a gangster. He's just, he's always been that guy with the machine gun, the gun hiding in his underneath his lapel or, whatever. But the movie I'm talking about, 1941, is Strawberry Blonde, where James Cagney has a crush on this beautiful redhead, this beautiful strawberry blonde redhead, who is just a lady girl in the neighborhood, is a talented girl, all this stuff, and all the guys are falling all over her in this kind of a relatively melodramatic, but more of a romantic comedy starring James Cagney, which in itself, gangster movie, romantic comedy, it's already an opposite just in that description alone. But in this movie, James Cagney plays a guy who's aspiring to be more than just a plain guy. He's aspiring to be a dentist. Now, I know as a gangster, you knock people's teeth out. But in this case, he wants to take them out professionally and having no true angst about it, just being that. But see, the irony for this movie, as much as I want him to not be a gangster, he's a tough guy in the neighborhood, but his aspirations are much higher than being just a part of the neighborhood. So this particular movie has a wonderful myriad of actors in this film that are just popular actors of the time. So ironically, the beautiful redhead that everyone's falling all over and trying to be around all the time is kind of evasive. And she knows that she's this attractive person and she can have any guy in the neighborhood. So after a while, and all these suitors are trying to get with her, unfortunately, Biff Grimes, which is James Cagney's character, is not one of those guys she chooses. So he's kind of feels down on himself, and then he meets this other woman, and he becomes fond of her. And to me, I think she's a beautiful woman. He marries Olivia de Havilland. So for some reason, this thing in his head about this redhead it just permeates years and years and years later. But let's talk about the cast for a second. You've got James Cagney, Olivia de Havilland, Rita Hayworth, which is the strawberry blonde of the film. Alan Hale plays James Cagney's father in this movie. Jack Carson is the guy who wins the girl. And George Tobias is the best friends of James Cagney. And George Reeves is also in this movie, the guy who used to play Superman back in the 30s, is in this movie. And he and James Cagney are neighbors, but they don't like each other. So they try to fight each other over this wall all the time. But the cool thing about this movie is you've got James Cagney. He doesn't have the greatest of jobs, and he's trying to become a dentist, but he's trying to become a dentist through mail order. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then George Tobias.
How do you do that?
I don't know. It's kind of crazy, but yet he finds a way. And George Tobias is his best friend, and he tries to always give him words of wisdom and keep him out of trouble. So part-time, he works at a bar as a bar back, and it just happens to be the bar that his father hangs out in. So it's a myriad of fun and folly and angst and craziness. But to me, it was just so funny that here's this guy who plays a gangster all the time in the majority of the films that I've ever seen. And not saying he doesn't have some other films. He's been in a lot of war movies. He's been in some other movies where he's been a secret agent. I mean, James Cagney is pretty diverse, but the majority of the films that I've ever known him for have been gangster movies. And have been shoot-em-ups. I've seen him get shot and killed like 10 times, in these movies. And yet here's a movie where, ironically, not only is he not a gangster, he's a dentist.
Surreal.
I just thought it is. I just thought that just made, I'm like, talking about not being a gangster in a movie, this was it, almost. I mean, there's a fight scene, but it's more in folly than it is in anything else. But it's just funny. He's a tough guy, dentist.
All right.
So how about you, Karen? What do you got for us?
Well, my person is Edward G. Robinson. And to me, he's just such an interesting person, because in my mind, he sort of became the icon for the bad guy. And he basically came to fame on the role that he will forever be known for, which is Little Caesar. It's a 1931 film, and his nickname was Little Caesar, and he basically he was known as Rico, but they called him Little Caesar, mainly because he was so short. But if you've ever seen this movie, Edward G. Robinson is about as despicable as you could be. And he just revels in the whole notion of being a gangster. It's like if somebody said, gee, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he would go, I want to be a gangster, see? Or whatever. And I mean, it's like his resume would be perfect for that. And the other neat thing about this movie, there are a couple of neat things about this. For one, Edward G. Robinson played this role with such relish. I'm really surprised he wasn't nominated for an Academy Award, but given the prevailing morals at the time, the production code and stuff like that, they probably weren't nominating gangster roles generally. The movie Little Caesar was nominated for a writing award. But what's interesting is that Edward G. Robinson personally was light years different than the Rico character that he played in Little Caesar. He was known in the industry as one of the most cultured, refined, erudite, sophisticated men ever. He was an avid art collector. In fact, he was famous for saying, "I don't collect art, art collects me." And he had
Wow, that's our first.
What happened?
I don't know. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, looks like we have a kind of a quirky thing happening here with Karen on that end.
This is really who he was playing. Who didn't mind screwing over his friends. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. played his best friend, and he didn't mind screwing over poor Douglas at all. The other thing that I think it's interesting to point out with regard to James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson is that, they made their bones in the theater. That's where you come from. It's vaudeville or Broadway. And Edward G. Robinson, just like James Cagney, was a song and dance man. he had done a great deal of theater before moving into the movies. And while he was doing movies, he did a lot of television. He was not one of these actors who just said, well, television's a come down, which was definitely a prevailing attitude in the 50s and the 60s. He had no problem doing television at all, and he did lots of different roles. So you have Rico, who ruthlessly takes over the gang that let him in and basically kills everybody that he can get his hands on, who he thinks is like outsmarting him. And ironically, when things start coming to a head, the cops are fast on his trail, and one of the cops starts bragging about, how he could basically wipe the floor with him, and he's kind of a coward and a lowlife, and he doesn't amount to much. And so Little Caesar stupidly gets mad and says, well, I'm going to show this cop. So he calls the cop, and that's how they find him. And it's like, if you weren't such an egomaniac, you probably could have gotten away with all these murders, but he wasn't. He was an egomaniac. So they got him, and he died by the gun. He lived by the gun, he died by the gun. So then you take that and you juxtapose that with one of my all-time favorite films, which is Double Indemnity, starring Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. Edward G. Robinson had a supporting role in this movie. It came out in 1944. Edward G. Robinson had a supporting role, and he played Barton Keyes, who was like the administrative head of a life insurance bureau company, but he was like head of one of the bureaus that basically dealt with these double indemnity policies. If you die by what was the double indemnity? It's like if you just die normally, you get paid the title of the policy, but if something happens to you and it's a really bad accident, then it's like double indemnity, so you get twice the amount of the policy or something along those lines. But anyway, that's why the movie was called Double Indemnity. And of course, Barbara Streisand is married to some old fart, and she wants him dead so that she can get the money off his life insurance policy. And she hooks up with Fred MacMurray, who's an insurance agent who innocently stops by to sell her insurance. Barton Keyes is sort of like this father figure to Fred MacMurray, and like a real mentor, and really just there's just not the electricity, but the compatibility between them, the chemistry between them is palpable. It's like they had their characters, and I think the actors themselves seemed to have a great deal of respect, regard for each other, and that came across on the screen.
Mhm.
And the tenderness with which Barton Keyes sort of looked after Fred McMurray, and he would just give him, you know, this fatherly advice. But at the same time, Barton Keyes was very much by the book, wanted to do his job, and felt very strongly that the company that he worked for should not be paying out insurance policies that are based on fraudulent circumstances. So he thought it was his upright, downright duty to investigate as much as possible to make sure that these payments were legitimate, and complete, like, way different than the character that he played in Little Caesar. Just way different. But, you know, really nice. I mean, he's just very genteel and just like the sweetest man. It's like you just want to hug him. He's like a teddy bear in Double Indemnity. And you just want to, like, smash him like the rat he is in Little Caesar. So, you know, to me, it just shows what an amazing actor he was. And his last role was Soylent Green, and he played a good guy in Soylent Green too, 1973. And he died just a couple of days after that movie was released. After the movie wrapped, I mean. But in that one, he played somebody, he was really playing a professor, but the professor in this movie, they were called books. This is a very dystopian movie, which has real interesting overtones considering the situation we're in now. But he was like a storyteller, historian, basically, who remembered the before time, before the days of Soylent Green, where people were literally rioting for food, there were no animals because the environment had been ruined, the air was foul. It was a dystopian Earth. And he played a very, you know, nice guy there who basically says, you know, I don't want to be part of this, you know, type of world anymore. And so I'm gonna just peace out. So anyway, interesting. He played a number of good guys. Our Vines Have Tender Grapes, Brother Orchid, I Am the Law, in which he played a law professor who became a prosecutor going after bad guys that you know, that would have been like a Little Caesar type thing. So he had a very diverse career, but it's interesting how they start out bad, and is particularly in that time frame, they really play like these horrible people, violent people, and then they play these almost angels.
Right.
So anyway,
Crazy.
Yeah.
Very, very extreme, but yet, as you alluded to, it just shows the scope of the actor. So, Larry,
Yeah.
You've let us go first, brother. What you got for us?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got, this is such a man's world, this thing called the movies. And I picked an actor or actress who could hold her own no matter how powerful the man was on that screen. And that's Bette Davis. She filled the screen with her vim and vinegar, and refused to give an inch. And if you were on that stage with her, if you were on that camera with her, you had to earn everything for the audience to watch you. She dominated the screen, and she was a marvelous actress. And people were afraid of her, partially because of how hard-nosed she was with this whole studio system, and hard-nosed with her co-stars. And some co-stars just hated her guts. And I'm not going to mention Joan Crawford. Oops, sorry.
Oops.
There are certain films that she did that really highlighted just how mean she could be. And one of those films is Little Foxes, and where she plays this very manipulative I'm not going to take nothing from nobody person, and she's willing to even let her husband die because she just refuses to accept anything but what she wants. So incredible. Now on the flip side, she did play some sweet roles, but they weren't sweet. They were powerful women in their own rights, and in some cases, she had to learn to be powerful. But um, in the same year, she did Baby Jane. It was 61 or like 60, 61. She also did another film for Frank Capra called A Pocket Full of Miracles. And Pocket Full of Miracles is a fantastic little film. It stars Glenn Ford, Betty Davis, Hope Lang, and Arthur O'Connell, sorry. And here she is, this street person, bag lady, you know, and her character's name is Apple Annie because that's how she makes a living, by selling apples. It's very much drawn into the whole world of the 1930s prohibition, and a lot of homeless people. And we find out quite early on in the film that she had a daughter, and she didn't want her daughter to grow up in the street, so she sent her daughter away. Her daughter grows up in Spain. The premise of the movie is her daughter is getting married, and she's bringing the fiance home to reunite herself with her mother, who she hasn't seen since almost an infant, and introduce her mother to her fiance. Well, on the other hand, here's Glenn Ford, also plays a good guy, but he's a crook. He's a gangster. And to him, Apple Annie is his good luck charm. And every day he buys an apple from her, and that apple gives him power. It gives him luck, the luck he needs to face the day without getting arrested, without getting shot and killed, with all of that stuff. So he finds out that Apple Annie is having this thing happening, and so he arranges for her to become a queen, a very well-bred woman of high society. Now, I got to tell you that this film is a remake of a Capra film that he did quite a few years earlier called Lady for a Day. Now, in this version, we have this version is a little bit more digestible than the first one. If you've seen it, Greg Karen, have you seen Lady for a Day? Have you seen that one?
No, I don't think so. I've seen Pocket Full of Miracles, but not Lady for a Day.
Most people haven't. It's good. It's good, but like so many of early Capra films, it's a little bit heavy-handed with social justice. This film has nothing to do with social justice. It has everything to do with the people involved and trying to become the best that they could be, and what's in their control and what isn't, and learning how to deal with those things. The daughter is played by Anne Margaret. And matter of fact, it's one of her first roles. The guy who plays Columbo, what's his name?
Peter Falk.
Peter Falk.
Yeah, Peter Falk is in it, and he plays Glenn Ford's right-hand man. It's a wonderful little film, and as she slowly being dressed properly and and groomed properly and learning how to speak properly. And in a way, it's another it's very similar to Pygmalion, but
I was
with a
going to say
twist.
that Pygmalion,
But
My
with a
Fair
twist, or
Lady.
My Fair Lady, but with a twist to it. Uh, and at the very, very end, when everything is finally settling, the funny thing is, and this is so cool, she doesn't just assume this new persona of being this wealthy, very high society woman. She gets right back into the street again with her people, the people who shine the shoes, who sell the apples, who deliver the newspaper at the doorstep. All of these people that are struggling to make it through the Depression. And it's one of these films that, is it a great film? It's not a great film. Is it a good film? Yes. Is it worth watching? Absolutely. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I've seen it a few times, and I've also seen Pygmalion and also My Fair Lady. And as you were speaking about it, that's what came to mind right away. And then I knew this woman, this young woman, who played in My Fair Lady, and she did that on a high school stage, if I remember correctly. And she played the leading role. And
I wonder who
uh,
that was.
I don't know. I think her name is Karen B. So I'm sure Karen related to that right away. As you
Yes, I
say.
do.
So, and you did a
But
good job.
one of the people who stars in this is a character actor from the older films, and that's Edward Everett Horton.
Oh, I love Edward Everett Horton.
Yeah, and he's again one of the linchpins in this film that make it all work. His delivery is so dry pan, and he's a master at giving a dry pan delivery. Again, a brilliant character actor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, my favorite role of his is really on the original Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, where he narrated Fractured Fairy Tales.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
my favorite role. His voiceovers on that, the way in which he tells those crazy fairy tales, it's just priceless. And I still watch Rocky and Bullwinkle. I still watch the original cartoons because I stream them.
Yeah.
Because they're a lot better than the drivel that passes for cartoons on television today, except for SpongeBob. The first 9 seasons. After season 9, forget it. It tanked after season 9, but the first 9 seasons were actually pretty good. Okay, I digress.
Okay. I remember him as the roaming chicken in F Troop, but that's just me. But yeah, I've always liked him in almost every film I've ever seen. And as you alluded to there, he's the kind of the glue that keeps things together here and there. And those are those unsung heroes, I should say, of film.
Yeah.
So he's definitely one of those people.
And Betty Davis, for if you want to learn something about acting for a camera, Betty Davis is one of the best. Her ability to put herself in focus, to demand the camera focus on her, to demand through her acting ability the audience focus in on her is quite outstanding. She had a very long career. She made a whole lot of films, and I've never been disappointed with anything she has done. I've always walked away feeling, wow, I just saw a marvelous piece of art with that acting ability.
Yeah, I've been a fan of Betty Davis for a long time. One of my favorite movies of hers is, I think, a favorite for a lot of people, All About Eve. And
love that movie.
Yeah, and I think it shows a huge range, even within the realms of the movie, because she's an actress in the movie. And so you're getting just an array of different sides of the Betty Davis persona in film, in this one little film, which is really one not little film, one big film. And it's I mean, you have everything in that film. Like there's good acting, there's backstabbing, there's Um,
There's all this industry insider stuff and the chauvinism about, well, I know that you're 40, but if you can't play a 20-year-old, you just don't have a career.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing film, and amazing actress, as you said, Larry. It's just
My favorite films.
one of my favorite. Yeah, and as is mine, and one of my favorite actresses for sure. And you had also mentioned Karen, Barbara Stanwyck, another one of my favorite actresses in film. Both these women are very strong characters, strong natured in the roles that they've chosen to play, and I think that in itself indirectly propelled women in film even that much more because of how strong these women were and how strong the characters were in the films that they chose. So, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, I'm just going to throw out another film that I think is worth watching, and that's Sabrina. And again, following along the lines of our theme, this is Humphrey Bogart, who also, like Cagney and Robinson, was a gangster in a lot of films and very popularly known for that. And also detectives and just a myriad of tough guys. Well, here he is as a flamboyant kind of playboy type in Sabrina. And Audrey Hepburn plays Sabrina, and her father is a servant in this guy's family, for this guy's family, and she has a crush on him growing up. And it's just an interesting film, and all the twists and turns that go along it. So the girl goes away and she comes back more sophisticated. And when she was a child, she didn't notice him, but as an adult, a few years later even, she's much more refined, and so now he notices that refined essence. So what I was going to also say is this movie was done in 1954, I think, with Humphrey Bogart, and it was remade with Harrison Ford in 1995.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about this is that the directors, Billy Wilder was the director in 1954, and Sidney Pollack was the director in 1995. Two really good directors and very well known in the industry. So I think for me, I like both versions, but I think I like the 1954 version best.
I like the 1954 version better too. And one thing that really made the 54 version so interesting was just sort of the interplay between William Holden and Humphrey Bogart, as William Holden played his younger brother. And the whole sort of premise of the movie is that, when Audrey Hepburn comes back, basically a butterfly out of the cocoon, when she comes back from Paris, she ought to be interested in William Holden. I mean, he's closer to her age, he's dashing, he's fun, he likes to have a good time, but she isn't really interested in him at all. She just thinks he's kind of shallow. And she's much more drawn to sort of the sober, just, very sort of upright, downright kind of persona.
Guy. Yep.
Yeah, that Humphrey Bogart's character presents, but at the same time, he's kind of really shy, but which could be mistaken for dullness. But if he lets loose, then he is just as much fun as William Holden without all the danger. So, I think, so Audrey Hepburn's character sees, that this is somebody you can attach your wagon to his wagon, and you don't have to worry about being derailed. God knows what's going to happen with William Holden.
Yeah.
Right.
I do have one more honorable mention.
Sure.
And that's Fred McMurray.
Why?
In the earlier days in his career, he was most often played a villain especially in film noir.
Yep.
Most often played a villain or somebody with a villainous bent.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes along 1961, and he does 2 films that year that define him on both sides of his scale. The one is The Apartment, that stars Jack Lemmon, right? And he plays Jack Lemmon's boss. And all Jack Lemmon is trying to do is to find a way to make a career and maybe meet a girl and then go on with the American dream. And here's Fred McMurray. He's conniving, he cheats, he's slanderous, and he abuses Jack Lemmon so that he can use Jack Lemmon's apartment for Fred McMurray's character can use as a place where he can take his affairs, extramarital affairs.
That's right.
And despicable character, but he does it so smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
And that same year, on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, he plays a guy in a Disney film called The Absent-Minded Professor.
Oh yeah.
So he creates flubber, and,
right.
and turns himself into a dog,
Don't forget Son of Flubber.
That's right. Yeah, so we've got this guy who plays. He's more, until that time, he was more well known for playing a bad guy or a bad person, and here he is now playing someone that, gosh darn it, everybody wished they had an uncle like him. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't forget his turn on television as the head of the family in My Three Sons.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and yeah, I mean, you take a look at.
That's about as goody two shoes as you can get.
I wish I could find a way to share this image. Let me see if I can, get this here, because he's got such a cool way of such a cool way of doing things. Here, let me move aside and you can see him. There he is, folks. Fred McMurray. You can tell he's dark. Look at him.
Yeah.
He looks sinister, conniving.
He does look sinister.
Yeah. And this guy here, very underrated. As a matter of fact, some movie critics, some of the better movie critics, think that he was extremely underrated as an actor, getting small films, small parts and stuff. He really had great acting chops. And if you get a chance to see this guy in some of these, especially his earlier movies, watch it. If you want a time for a good laugh and just a feel-good movie for the family, The Absent-Minded Professor, Disney, 1961.
Watchman Alice Adams, where he played a dandy, and then and then Double Indemnity. That's like my all-time favorite. But he was also in a lot of cowboy movies too. So
yeah,
but
and
the
usually
movie where he was both good and bad in the same time became Mutiny.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
Oh
that's
my
true.
Goodness, you were so right about that. Good catch, Greg.
He made you think that he was the good guy, and he really wasn't.
He never really
was sniveling.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. He was very good at that. Very good at playing roles that made you just not like people sometimes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to cut this umbilical cord right now. We're out of here. Thanks again for joining us for another session here and episode on The Real Point of View. Check out our YouTube channel, and we appreciate you hanging out with us, and we'll see you guys next time here on A Real Point of View, and maybe, hopefully sometime soon, we'll see you at the popcorn stand. Have a good night, everybody. We appreciate you, and take care until next time.
Peace, everybody.